dedicated to empowering you with information
to make positive choices
and be advocates for your overall well-being.
Welcome to The Health View. Welcome to The Health View. I'm Yvonne Dunitz, and here are my co-hosts, Dr. Laura Chan and Dr. Margarita Ochoa-Maya. We're so delighted that you're with us today. As you remember, last week we talked about how food makes us sick. Today we're going to be talking about what to do when food makes us sick. I would highly recommend, if you haven't done so already, to get a pen or a pencil and some paper so that you can take notes, and also so that you can put down your questions so that you can feel free at the end of the show to contact us at info@ycdholistichealing.com so that we can see your questions and include them in our show so that we can answer them, as well as if there are any topics that you would like us to address. Please be sure to email us. We love the fact that you can interact with us and we can share your questions and provide further information for you. So, we know that no two bodies are alike, and how we respond to food is different. So today, we're going to cover three main components related to our diet as to what we eat: detoxification, elimination, and anti-inflammatory diets. And what I encourage you to do is look and listen so that you can be empowered to figure out what you might be able to do, as well as discuss with your own doctors as far as what would be the best route for you, because you are the one that is the perfect person that truly knows what it is that is best for you. So let's start about detoxification. Dr. Chan, or Dr. Laura, we'll call you for now. Tell us a little bit about what is this whole thing called detoxification? What does it mean to the body?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Detoxification is the process of breaking down toxins in the body and eliminating them. And certain organs do that more than other organs. The liver, right here on our right side in our upper abdomen, is a big organ. It's almost like the biggest filter in the body that breaks food down and detoxifies. The kidneys are involved. The whole digestive tract gets involved. And other organs, including our lungs and our skin, are involved in the detoxification process. When you consume food that has to get broken down, first in the stomach, and then the whole digestive process involves all those organs, and food gets broken down and eventually eliminated. And sometimes there are things in or on that food that aren't healthful for the body. So a toxin is really something that's not healthful for the body in any way. And so it needs to be eliminated. Ideally, it's eliminated. Otherwise, if it's not, over time, it can make someone feel unwell. So we need to support the organs that detoxify in our body and that eliminate, and also hopefully reduce the amount of toxins or things that don't support our health that are coming into our bodies.
So how might we start that elimination process of knowing, first of all, the toxins that may be affecting us, and what would we do?
Sure. So first you want to reduce exposure always. And we've talked about this in previous shows. I always suggest referring to the Clean 15 Dirty Dozen to make sure that you're reducing the pesticide spray on foods that you're eating and consuming, reducing processed foods, and then also reducing chemicals in your environment is an important way to reduce exposure.
Going green.
Going green, absolutely. But we live in the post-industrial world. We're all getting exposed to things daily. So then we want to optimize the ways that our bodies detoxify and break things down once we've reduced the exposure from the external environment. And there are certain foods that support detoxification. So there are cleanses and supplements that one can take, but I'd never start there. It's so important to just start with the basics, the foundations, making sure you're drinking a lot of clean water throughout the day, and eating a wholesome diet with a lot of fruits and vegetables, ideally organic, especially if they're from the Dirty Dozen list. And those foods have a lot of nutrients that support your body's natural ability to detoxify. and break things down. Some people might need additional support beyond that, but just starting with the basics with a clean diet, a lot of fruits and vegetables, and reducing processed food is one of the best ways to start.
Okay. Now, did you have any thoughts related that you'd like to add regarding detoxification?
Yes, absolutely. See, what we're talking about is a lot of people are talking about detoxification, and some people might be confused that what is really a detoxification diet. And not only do we want to keep in mind that toxins could be, yes, environmental, and we have to become more and more aware every day of the importance of the environment and the toxins we are having in the environment. Now, when I talk about the environment, it's like the room we're in. And so it could be thoughts, bad thoughts. It could be a bad environment for your brain. Bad people around you. They could be bad environment for you to be living in. If somebody is constantly telling you, let's go drink, then they might not be a good friend. Or let's go eat and let's eat unhealthy foods. That might be an environment that you want to detoxify. But then specifically with foods, there are some foods that are inflammatory on their own. And so it's important that we will go in further detail to discuss what are those that we want to look at as toxins, so that when we then speak about how to eliminate those, that would be in the elimination diet part. But lastly, I wanted to talk about our mental thoughts, and I thought maybe you could give a little insight into that, with the importance of really cleaning up our thoughts and really working towards our self-care. And that is one of the bigger processes of detoxification. As much as it is the food, it is our environment. So what do you think about that?
Well, you're right on. I think that we've spoken about this, but I truly believe positive thoughts, positive people, positive choices, positive experiences. If we surround ourselves and do those things, we can be very healthy. If the people that we're around, that we choose to be around, are toxic to us, we need to learn the skills on how to be able to communicate and relate to them in the best possible way. The other thing is, if we're around negative people, and learning how not to take on their stuff. Because when we take on their stuff, it can make them sick. And a lot of disease comes from the relationships that we have. People are unhappy with their relationships. They're literally toxic to them, and it comes out within their physical bodies. So there are numerous ways that we can help people with that. We can help them to learn different stress management techniques. We can help them to even do some guided imagery, even hypnosis that can help them, self-hypnosis, on being able to bring positive words towards them. Breathing, helping them to breathe, other dynamics. And I know we're going to do a show on stress management techniques, and we're going to get really into all of these different things. But you're absolutely right. Our thoughts can be toxic, and they can, in fact, relate to our bodies and affect our bodies.
And more specifically, talking about our organs, like you so well talked about in terms of our lungs, we actually breathe in and breathe out.
Correct.
So as we breathe out, we actually can eliminate some byproducts of fat. But the lungs, of course, keeping cigarettes and smoking, to zero.
Right.
And then alcohol and other substances that can be toxic to the liver, which is another very important organ that cleans up our system. I always use like a fish tank analogy. Yeah. For those of you that have a fish tank, you know that the proper filtering is necessary, and
Absolutely.
when the filter is gone bad, the water turns green. And lastly, our kidneys. Very, very important for detoxification is hydration. And now that we've been in the summer days, and even in the cold temperature, with air conditioning and things like that, keeping hydrated is a very important part of detoxification.
Huge.
I'd like to add a thought
Please.
on what we were talking about. You were mentioning how our thoughts affect our physical bodies, which is absolutely true, no doubt about that. I've also really observed in people how food and what we put in our body affects our thoughts. And so, for instance, when someone does start to clean up their diet, maybe go through an elimination diet or a detoxification diet, they might start to have clearer thoughts. Anxiety might start to lift, and depression might change.
And that fogginess that some people get when they eat certain foods.
Absolutely.
That is
and
so
very
so
true.
It really goes both ways.
It does go both ways. And also, we spoke about last time on why people eat. And for some people, food is a comfort food, and it they eat because they're nervous or whatever else, or it connects with something that goes back a long time ago for them, and by eating it, it makes them feel more comfortable or brings them comfort. But in fact, for some people, a lot of the comfort foods that they have are actually triggers to make them sick. As they begin to discover what are the foods that do make them sick. And so on that note, did you have another
Yes, I
thought?
had a point to add. Importantly, when you are detoxifying and when people actually are eating, and the way emotional eating can take the best of you and sometimes self-control, there is some data to support that actually more than half of the people who after eating, actually after finishing eating, feel guilty. So the association of what you are eating and what I hear commonly in the practice, which is, doctor, I know what I have to do. I just have to do it.
Exactly.
And I think what is important there, and I know, Yvonne, you do it so beautifully, I think being able to empower patients to be able to allow themselves to, I usually use the word like put your gut in rehab, or bringing it back to a time where it's going to be having such a field day in terms of good and wonderful, healthy things as compared to a more toxic day at a ball game, for example, or things like that where we have more toxic foods like fried dough and hot dogs and things like that.
I think you make such a good point there, Dr. Margarita, which is that people don't have to be on an angelic diet all the time, but it's important to take certain periods where we hit the reset button. I like to suggest doing a cleanse at least once a year, if not twice, at the change of seasons,
So
spring
what do you
and
mean
fall.
by a cleanse, so that our audience knows?
Very good question. That's when we cut out foods that tend to trigger inflammation in our bodies, and we'll talk more specifically about what those are in just a minute. But an overview being we cut out those foods temporarily, and sometimes we can add in more specific foods or even nutrients in the form of vitamins that support the kidneys, that support the liver to detoxify. And what that means is really to just break things down a little bit better and help the body to clear them out. So it's a set period of time where one can do that. One can do a very gentle cleanse on their own. More advanced ones might need to be supervised. There are a variety of different ways, but I always like to just start with the basics. Clean up the diet, clean up the food, drink clean water.
You know, it's interesting because one of our listeners did write in and mention that they find when they eat their comfort foods that it triggers them. So they wrote something, when I eat macaroni and cheese, bread and butter, peanut butter and jelly, sandwiches, ice cream, cookies fresh out of the oven, which I really love, or coffee or potato chips or donuts or mashed potatoes, for some reason, it makes me sick. I enjoy them, they said, when they have them, but something happens to me, she says. So why is that? What would help get rid of that? How do I know what to do and how to do it? Does that lead us into the elimination diet?
It does.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
And most importantly, what happens is when we're going to do the elimination diet, somebody who you described in this case, our listener, you know, those are foods that are very hard to digest. And so very importantly, just to capitalize on what we talked in our last visit, the body has a very hard time breaking these things down. So aside from what we're going to be talking about, which is eliminating them, or at least temporarily until you identify if that is a particular food or not, I think also being very cautious about the gallbladder, proper chewing, you know, situations in which these foods are very, very hard to digest.
Right. And if we eat them in a stressed out state, even worse.
And people do that. A lot of them go for the crunch or they eat more or whatever. And so I thought that the listener, this was very interesting. It was perfect because of what we're talking about, on point. So let's talk about this. You know, the word, the elimination diet, it sounds pretty common sense that we're eliminating something and then bringing back it to try to understand what it does to our body. So perhaps you can lead with, what is this thing called the elimination diet, and can anybody do it?
Sure. So the elimination diet in general is very safe for anyone to do. There are some contraindications, and you can elaborate on this even more, but off the top of my head, a diabetic, type 1 diabetic or an advanced type 2 diabetic should really do this in supervision with their doctor. Other people who are in more compromised health states, they'd want to be supervised with their doctor.
And I would think that everybody should always remember that anything that we discuss on this show is something that it's important for them to really speak to their doctor or
Absolutely.
their primary care
Very
provider
important.
about. Just don't go ahead and do these things
Right.
on your own. You always want to make sure that you're doing what's best for you and that you get that input.
Another one is if a person has gout.
Good point.
So gout, where we're going to talk about the elimination diet, can actually be temporarily activated. So it's very important to, for sure, seek medical advice if you do have an ongoing prescription of medications and circumstances in which manipulating your diet could actually be detrimental, because sometimes these medications become far more powerful.
Yes.
Right.
And therefore, then now you have the side effects of them. So yes, I agree with you.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
so
other
speak
than-
about that.
Other than
elimination.
there are some instances when one should really be more careful. The elimination diet is, as you said, pretty straightforward. There are certain foods that we eliminate from the diet for a period of time, usually at least 2 weeks. That gives the body enough time to have any immune reactions to food lessen and start to detoxify and reduce inflammation. And then after that period of time, those foods that we eliminated, we add back in one at a time. And that gives you an opportunity to really see if your body's having a response to those foods. And ideally, you want to wait at least 2-3 days between adding each food back in, so you can pay attention. Oh, is that bread that I just added back in after 2 weeks, did that trigger my headache? Or did I feel suddenly much more fatigued in the afternoon? Or maybe not. Maybe 3 days later you try adding back in a dairy product and immediately find that you have some sinus trouble or some loose stools. And then it becomes pretty direct and you're able to figure out, oh, that food causes this for me.
And you keep a journal so
And you
you
keep
can
a journal.
keep note of each day what's happening.
Exactly. So there are different levels of strictness through which one can do this diet. I see that you have a book there about the elimination diet, and that really is one of the more strict ways that you can do it. And I would recommend a more strict form for someone who has really compromised digestion or compromised health, and to do that under supervision. But if someone were to just try to figure out if they were reacting to some of the more common foods that one triggers, then those are the ones that we're going to eliminate for a period of time and add them back in one at a time. Those include wheat and all byproducts of wheat, so any gluten-containing products. Gluten is a protein that's in wheat, and it's used to thicken a lot of things. So it's in gravies, it's in beer because that's made from wheat. It's even in soy sauce. It's in salad dressings. It's in a lot of things.
It's in bread too, right?
It's in bread. It's in pasta and baked
I like
goods.
thinking of it as like glue.
It's glue.
like glue.
Gluten
And
is
so
glue.
everything
like a
together.
burger. Like
Yep.
a burger, and what keeps the burger kind of in the form of a patty could be gluten.
Yep.
So very, very difficult to break down gluten.
Very difficult. So gluten and so all the foods that contain it. Dairy products can often be a big trigger for people. Eggs. So gluten, dairy, and eggs are the foods that I see most commonly be a trigger. And then soy can commonly be a trigger. And the nightshade vegetables. Those include potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and tobacco. So if someone's a smoker, ideally they can take a break. There are some other foods that might be triggers, but when I'm keeping it simple, those are the ones I focus on. How
And
about you?
I'd like to elaborate on that, because see, what we're thinking is, I like to add chicken. And what we do when we actually have these inflammatory foods is that, for example, in the milk, the milk no longer is the milk like if we lived in a farm. It actually has all these additives. It actually even has sugar added to it. It might even have some gluten. And so milk, as we know it, is really more of like a shadow of what milk really is.
That's why, would it be better to have organic milk?
It would be best, and even consider a raw milk. We could actually really have, and we might even want to have a show on that
Yeah.
with our community-supported agriculture
Oh,
and how we can
absolutely.
locally fund that. But I wanted to add a little step further. milk comes from a cow that recently delivered, and that is breast milk in terms of a cow.
Surely.
So it has a lot of estrogen. Now, also how those cows are being treated, if they're given antibiotics, or if the hay they're eating, or if they're given corn. Corn is not a meal for a cow, but they are given these grains and so on. So when we talk about elimination, sometimes this casein or these proteins in milk can cause problems in which you can only eliminate them through sweat, and then the sweat causing the acne. So back to the cow, bringing it back to the eggs, for example, why I think eggs are very inflammatory. It happens to be another case of a female chicken. It's a female chicken in the case of an ovulation. And in my background as an endocrinologist, we want to think of this as eggs per se would have enough estrogen in them because they come from a female chicken, not a rooster. And that, furthermore, to take it to chicken, chicken is a very common staple in our food today. But again, the way these chickens are raised and treated and even euthanized, we want to be very careful of that. That's kind of very inflammatory and can cause quite a bit of problems to our gut. Do you agree?
I do agree, and I'm glad you brought up corn too, because corn can often be a food trigger and should be included on the list of foods to eliminate for 2 weeks at least.
GMOs.
Yeah,
GMOs.
so it's really important to know what we're choosing to eat and where and how whatever we're choosing to eat has been, what food they've been given and taken care of and all
Right.
of that.
Right.
Let's switch now to the anti-inflammation diet.
Perfect.
So would you like to lead with that as far as covering that, or would you hop into
I
it?
can start a little
Please.
bit with it. I think ultimately the anti-inflammation is by virtue of the word inflammation
Right.
is that these foods that cause inflammation, we are going to eliminate them and give space for things that are healthy and that will promote a good gastrointestinal function. And using those foods in which now then you're going to look at your diet and see where you can take gluten away, where if you have an excess of corn, where if you have an excess of artificial sweeteners and circumstances of those. So I usually recommend a patient to even do a list of all the things that they probably think they should change, or that they think in their common sense it's probably I'm too much of. And from that list, you move to the second list, which is what am I really, really going to do? So maybe you have a list of 10 things you would like to change about yourself and detoxify. Then let's focus on things that are more doable, and then just pick 2 or 3. Now, that is a milder version, and at the same time might not have the complete benefits of a radical elimination diet, but at least self-observation and to
Right.
see where you're being toxic and where you think you need to weed your garden.
Right.
You know, in weeding the garden, a lot of people are so afraid that if they do something like this and discover, they're afraid, what am I going to be able to eat?
Right.
Right.
And so you were going to
That's a good
speak to,
point.
let's talk
I will.
about that.
The elimination diet is an extreme form of the anti-inflammatory diet. That's why I don't ask people to do it any longer than 2 weeks before they start adding things back in. So as Dr. Margarita pointed out, the anti-inflammatory diet eliminates certain foods that are going to trigger inflammation in our bodies where we feel unwell, maybe headaches, maybe some swelling, maybe some digestive problems, skin changes. A lot of things can be, as we talked about last week, triggered by this. So the anti-inflammatory diet and the elimination diet really go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And I tend to individualize it for people based on what they tell me is doable for them and what's really possible in their lifestyle, because sometimes it's really challenging to make these changes. So regarding the question about, I find that I'm reactive to this food, do I need to leave it out forever? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. So there is hope that a lot of times if you're reactive to a certain food, that a period of elimination and healing the digestive tract will allow you to add foods back in moderation. It's really about the integrity of your gut in a lot of times. One of the major reasons why you wouldn't be able to add a certain food back in is if you're determined to have celiac disease, which is a situation of roughly 1 out of 100 people have true active celiac disease, and that number is actually increasing. But if you're determined to have celiac disease, you really need to avoid gluten strictly for the rest of your life. There are other instances where someone might be able to add it back in after doing some work to repair the integrity of their digestive tract.
So there's a process. So why don't we summarize the process of what people need to go through? First of all, what we're trying to do is make sure that they become acutely aware of how certain foods that they ate affect their bodies, right?
Yes.
And in so doing, if they begin to feel bloated or sick or swollen or groggy or foggy or angry, even their moods can change, that might be a good time for them to step back and say, you know, maybe it's time for me to analyze and keep a journal of what I
Yes.
eat, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe it's food.
Maybe it's food. And that there are a variety of methods that they can do to get an idea as to what foods may be causing them problems and symptoms.
Yes.
And you mentioned to begin detoxification. And that is something that can help clear and cleanse the body.
Yes.
The second thing that you mentioned was elimination, and that there are elimination diets that people can, in fact, go through. And of course, you'd work with your physician on all of these to see what is the best way based upon your health status, right?
Absolutely.
And then the other thing that you said was the anti-inflammation diet. And in that regard, again, looking at the organs, looking at what's happening in the body, and then responding related again to what you're eating.
Right. And frankly, all of these diets really go hand in hand. So they're all very similar, the same. If one were to do the elimination diet, it would fall under the category of a detoxification and an anti-inflammatory diet.
Interesting, and detoxification. Or, but you thought that this book was a good one.
I do. I think it's very informative for people.
So I'm just going to hold it up for people just so that you can see it.
Yes.
It's called The Elimination Diet. Discover the foods that are making you sick and tired and feel better fast. And
Yes.
of course, like any informational piece, you learn from it. And it also has recipes in it, which was interesting, to give you ways to feel like, oh my, there are things you can actually eat if you find out
Right.
that many foods are not working for you. But what else would you like to wrap up and tell our audience about?
Celiac disease. I think a lot of people are confused why there's so much gluten-free diets, but celiac disease, as you mentioned, with the frequency we are seeing it, is an autoimmune attack against the gut, and that definitely needs doctor's attention.
Yes.
So it's very important for our audience to really communicate with their physicians, their primary care providers, as to what's going on with them. But what we really need you to do is really be observant yourself. So you become the experts on your body so that you can tell them, when I eat this, this is what I'm noticing. When I do this or whatever else. And environmentally, to notice your environment too, as far as if you're getting sick in certain settings and what you're noticing about that. Our show, The Health View, is all about empowering you with information. These past few shows has been about what we eat and how you eat and what you can do. Please send any of your questions to info@ycdholistichealing.com. We look forward to seeing you next week. And in the meantime, you take good care of yourself. Be well, take care, be healthy.
The preceding program